Imagine being 15, homeless, and standing in front of a broken jet engine worth more than your entire neighborhood. Now imagine knowing that if you don't speak up, someone will die. Daniel Harper had 5 seconds to decide. Stay invisible or risk everything. He chose 5 words that exposed a criminal network and saved countless lives. This story will remind you why we should never judge someone by their circumstances. Welcome to the Fortune Files channel. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and share your thoughts on the story, as well as where you are watching from. Let me tell you about Daniel Harper. 15 years old, living on the streets of Chicago for 8 long months. But this isn't just another sad story about a homeless kid. This is about the night everything changed. The night one boy's knowledge became the difference between life and death. Daniel had 3 things left from his father: a worn leather notebook filled with diagrams and notes, the ability to understand any aircraft engine ever built, and the memory of his dad's voice saying, "Son, machines don't lie to you. They always tell the truth if you know how to listen." His father, Robert Harper, had been one of the finest aircraft mechanics at O'Hare International Airport. The kind of man who could diagnose an engine problem just by listening to it run. For 10 years, young Daniel spent every weekend in that hangar, learning everything his dad knew. While other kids played video games, Daniel learned about turbine blades and compression ratios. While others went to birthday parties, he studied hydraulic systems and fuel flow. Then his mother got sick. Cancer. The medical bills piled up like snowdrifts in a Chicago winter. His father got laid off 6 months before his pension kicked in. They said it was budget cuts, but Daniel knew better. They just didn't want to pay what they owed a man who'd given them 20 years of loyal service. His mother died when Daniel was 13. His father followed 2 years later, broken by grief and illness. No pension. No insurance. No family to take in a teenage boy who only knew how to fix things nobody wanted fixed anymore. That's how Daniel ended up on the streets. 8 months of sleeping in abandoned buildings. 8 months of hunger that made his hands shake. 8 months of people looking through him like he was invisible. But on this particular night, with rain hammering down like bullets, Daniel slipped through a side entrance at a private airfield on the edge of the city. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was just looking for somewhere dry to sleep. What he found instead was chaos. The hangar was massive, bright with fluorescent lights that hurt his eyes after so many dark nights. And there, in the center, sat the most beautiful aircraft he'd ever seen. A private jet that probably cost more than entire neighborhoods. Sleek. Powerful. Perfect. Except it wasn't perfect. Daniel could see that immediately. Around the aircraft stood a crowd of people. Expensive suits. Worried faces. And in the middle of them all stood a man who looked like he owned the world. Tall. Silver hair. Eyes like winter ice. His suit probably cost more than Daniel's father had made in a month. This was Jonathan Blackwood, billionaire, owner of half the commercial real estate in 3 states. A man who'd built an empire from nothing and crushed anyone who got in his way. "I pay you people hundreds of thousands of dollars," Blackwood was saying, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "And you're telling me you can't fix one engine?" The lead engineer, a nervous man with glasses, stammered something about diagnostic systems and component analysis. The other engineers, all wearing pristine white coveralls with fancy university logos, looked at each other uncomfortably. Daniel pressed himself against the wall behind some equipment, trying to stay invisible. But his eyes kept going back to that engine. Even from 30 feet away, he could see something was wrong. The way the housing sat. The angle of the turbine assembly. The slight discoloration near the fuel line. His lips moved silently, running through the checklist his father had drilled into him 1,000 times. "Security," someone shouted. "We've got a homeless kid in here." Every head turned toward Daniel. He froze, his heart pounding. A stocky mechanic started walking toward him, anger on his face. "What are you doing here, street rat?" Looking for something to steal. Daniel should have run. Every survival instinct told him to run. But he couldn't stop staring at that engine. Because he'd just seen something that made his blood run cold. This wasn't just a breakdown. This was sabotage. Someone had deliberately damaged this aircraft. And if they fixed it wrong, if they missed what Daniel was seeing, whoever flew in that plane was going to die. "Get her out," Blackwood said dismissively, already turning away. That's when the words tumbled out of Daniel's mouth before he could stop them. "Your high-pressure turbine shaft is misaligned. Probably from thermal stress during maintenance. And someone's tampered with your fuel line. If you fly this plane the way it is, it's going to crash." The hangar went absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Blackwood turned back slowly, his cold eyes studying Daniel like he was examining a bug under a microscope. "What did you just say?" Daniel swallowed hard. His mouth was dry, his hands shaking. But he met that intimidating gaze and said the 5 words that would change everything. "If you permit, I will fix it." The laughter that followed was cruel. The mechanics doubled over. The engineers shook their heads in disbelief. Even some of Blackwood's business associates, standing in their $1,000 suits, chuckled at the absurdity. A homeless kid, soaking wet, probably hasn't eaten in days. And he thinks he can fix what million-dollar engineers couldn't solve? But Jonathan Blackwood wasn't laughing. There was something in this boy's eyes. Not arrogance, not stupidity, but absolute certainty. The same look Blackwood himself had worn decades ago when everyone told him he'd never succeed. "You know about jet engines?" Blackwood asked. "I know about this one," Daniel replied, stepping forward even though every instinct screamed at him to run. "It's a Rolls-Royce BR 725. And I know that everyone here is looking in the wrong place for the problem." The lead engineer scoffed. "Mr. Blackwood, surely you're not going to. How do you know this?" Blackwood interrupted, still studying Daniel. "Does it matter?" Daniel asked. "If I can fix it." Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that shocked everyone in that hangar. "You have one chance. Show me what you see." Daniel approached the aircraft like it was sacred. Because to him it was. His father had taught him that every machine deserves respect. Every engine has a soul if you know how to feel it. He climbed onto the work platform, his torn sneakers squeaking against the metal. Up close, the engine was even more magnificent. Precision engineering. Thousands of parts working in perfect harmony. Or they should be working in harmony. "Hand me that dental mirror," Daniel said, his voice steady now. The stocky mechanic, whose name tag read Stevens, laughed bitterly. "A dental mirror? What are you, a dentist?" "No, but I need to see behind the coupling housing without taking apart the whole assembly. Unless you want to spend another 6 hours on disassembly." Blackwood nodded to Stevens. "Give him what he needs." As Daniel worked, he began to explain what he was seeing. Not to show off, but because his father had taught him that transparency builds trust. The coupling was torqued to specification, he said, angling the mirror into the narrow space. But whoever did it didn't account for thermal expansion variance. This model runs hotter than the older versions. Over time, that heat creates a microscopic offset in the shaft. Maybe 2 millimeters. Doesn't sound like much, right? He looked at the gathered engineers. Some were leaning in now, curiosity replacing skepticism. But at 10,000 revolutions per minute, 2 millimeters becomes a harmonic vibration. And that vibration triggers the safety systems to shut everything down. The lead engineer pulled out his tablet, scrolling frantically. The maintenance logs. There have been intermittent temperature spikes. Small ones. The pilots wrote them off as sensor errors. "They weren't errors," Daniel said quietly. "They were warnings. The engine was trying to tell you something was wrong." For 20 minutes, Daniel worked in focused silence. His hands, scarred from living on the streets, moved with a grace and precision that seemed impossible. These were hands that had gone hungry, that had fought for survival. But they still remembered everything his father had taught them. Blackwood found himself moving closer, fascinated. "You learned this from someone." It wasn't a question. Daniel's hands paused for just a moment. "My father. Robert Harper. He was the best mechanic Chicago ever had." Could hear problems other people couldn't even detect with computers. He died 3 years ago. Cancer took my mom first. Then losing her took him. Left me with nothing but his notebook and everything he taught me. The hangar had gone quiet again. But this time, it wasn't mockery. It was something else. Something like respect starting to take root. That's when Blackwood's wife arrived. Victoria Blackwood, dripping in jewelry that could feed a family for a year. She took one look at Daniel and her face twisted with disgust. "Jonathan, you cannot be serious. This child? Touching our aircraft. This child," Blackwood said coldly, "knows more about this engine than anyone else here." Their son, Parker, stood beside his mother. Prep school blazer. Perfect hair. The kind of kid who'd never known what it meant to be hungry. He looked at Daniel like he was something stuck to his shoe. "Dad, this is embarrassing. What will people say?" "They'll say I get results," Blackwood replied, "while others make excuses." Daniel kept working, trying to ignore the family drama. But then he saw something that made his stomach drop. Fresh scratches on a fuel line. Marks that hadn't been there when he started. Someone had been at the engine while he was getting tools. "Mr. Blackwood," Daniel said quietly, "we need to talk. Privately." When the crowd had moved back, Daniel showed him the scratches. "Someone's trying to make sure I fail. These marks are deliberate. If we run the engine now, it'll look like I caused a fuel leak." Blackwood's expression turned to ice. "You're certain?" "My father lost his job because someone sabotaged his work to get rid of him. I know what deliberate damage looks like." "Can you fix it?" "Yes. But Mr. Blackwood, someone in this hangar wants your plane to stay broken. Question is why?" At that moment, a smooth voice interrupted them. "Jonathan, old friend. I heard about your troubles." A man approached, silver-haired, expensively dressed. This was Edward Sterling, Blackwood's longtime business rival. The kind of man who smiled while sharpening his knives. "Sterling," Blackwood said coldly. "Convenient that you're here. I was in the area. Heard your plane was grounded. Thought I'd offer assistance. My team can be here within the hour." "How kind," Blackwood said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Almost like you were expecting my plane to have problems." Daniel watched the exchange carefully. 8 months on the streets had taught him to recognize predators. And Edward Sterling was definitely a predator, circling wounded prey. "Mr. Blackwood," Daniel said, drawing attention back, "I need specific tools. And I need people I can trust to hand them to me." Stevens, the mechanic who'd mocked him earlier, stepped forward. But there was guilt in his eyes now. When he handed Daniel a torque wrench, Daniel examined it carefully. "This is calibrated wrong," Daniel said flatly. "Off by 15%. Enough to cause failure, but subtle enough to look like my error." Stevens' face went red. He couldn't meet anyone's eyes. "How much did Sterling pay you?" Blackwood asked, his voice dangerous. Stevens' silence was answer enough. Daniel continued his work, but now with additional people watching his every move. A retired judge named Helen Washington had arrived, a friend of his father's who'd been searching for Daniel since he ran away from the group home. "Daniel Harper," she said warmly, "your father would be so proud of you right now." But the danger wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Because as Daniel worked deeper into the engine, he discovered something that made everything else look simple. This wasn't just about grounding one plane. Someone wanted Jonathan Blackwood dead. And they'd planned it very, very carefully. The night stretched on. Daniel's exhaustion was catching up with him, but he couldn't stop now. Because every layer he uncovered revealed another piece of a much larger, much darker puzzle. "Mr. Blackwood," Daniel said, his voice tight with tension, "I need you to look at this." He pointed to a component deep in the combustion chamber. To the untrained eye, it looked perfectly normal. But Daniel's trained eye saw something terrifying. This pressure relief valve. It's been replaced. But not with the right part. This one's rated for lower temperatures. At altitude, under stress, it would fail catastrophically. The engine wouldn't just stop. It would explode. The blood drained from Blackwood's face. Someone tried to kill me. Not tried, Daniel corrected. Someone still is trying. Because there's more. He showed them a secondary fuel line, carefully hidden to look like part of the original design. This creates a fuel spray pattern that would ignite. Again, only at altitude. On the ground, everything would test perfectly normal. The FBI had been called. Federal agents now swarmed the hangar, treating it like the crime scene it was. Edward Sterling was questioned, his smooth confidence cracking under professional interrogation. But Sterling wasn't the mastermind. That became clear when his assistant, a man named Gregory Nash, was found hiding in the maintenance tunnels, trying to escape. Nash broke quickly under interrogation. "It's bigger than Sterling," he said desperately. "There's a network. They use private aviation to move things. Illegal things. Blackwood's routes were perfect for what they needed. When he wouldn't sell, they decided to remove him permanently." Daniel listened to all of this while continuing his work. Because talk wouldn't save anyone. Only fixing what was broken would do that. Parker Blackwood, the privileged son, approached Daniel hesitantly. "How do you stay so calm when everything's falling apart around you?" Daniel looked at him. "When you've lost everything that matters, you learn to focus on the one thing you can control. Right now, that's making sure this engine is safe." "I've never lost anything," Parker admitted quietly. "Then you're lucky," Daniel said without bitterness. "But it also means you've never had to discover how strong you really are." Something shifted in Parker's expression. For the first time in his privileged life, he was seeing beyond his own comfortable bubble. As dawn approached, Daniel made his final repairs. Every sabotaged component had been replaced. Every system had been triple-checked. But he insisted on one more thing. "We need to do a full test flight. Not just ground testing. Actual flight. It's the only way to be completely sure." Blackwood nodded. "Tomorrow. Weather's clear. You'll be on board." Daniel felt his heart skip. "Me? In the plane? You fixed it. You should see it fly." Blackwood paused. "Your father never got to fly in the planes he fixed, did he?" "He always said someday he would," Daniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But someday never came." "Then tomorrow," Blackwood said firmly. "You fly for both of you." That morning, Daniel got his first real sleep in a proper bed in 8 months. Judge Washington had taken legal custody of him, offering him a small apartment above her garage. It wasn't much, but it was safe. It was warm. It was home. The next day brought new challenges. As they prepared for the test flight, they found 3 more sabotage devices, each one carefully hidden, each one designed to cause failure in different ways. "They really wanted you dead," Daniel said, carefully disabling another device. "They wanted more than that," Blackwood replied. "They wanted my entire fleet grounded, my business destroyed, and a clear path for their illegal operations." The test flight was scheduled for noon. But first came more discoveries. Edward Sterling had been arrested. So had 3 maintenance contractors. But the investigation kept spreading, uncovering a network that reached into government offices, regulatory agencies, even law enforcement. Daniel stood in that hangar, looking at the aircraft that had changed everything. Around him, investigators worked. Journalists waited outside. The whole world, it seemed, was watching to see if a homeless boy's repairs would hold up. Judge Washington approached him. Nervous. Terrified. Daniel admitted. "What if I missed something? What if?" "Your father," she interrupted gently, "taught you everything he knew, and you've added your own wisdom to that foundation. Trust in what you've learned. Trust in what you are." The test pilot, a grizzled veteran named Captain Rodriguez, reviewed every detail of Daniel's work. After an hour, he looked up with respect in his eyes. "Son, I've been flying for 30 years. This is the most thorough repair documentation I've ever seen. You write like someone who understands that lives depend on getting it right." "They do," Daniel said simply. As the pre-flight checks began, Daniel's hands moved across the systems with absolute confidence. He'd checked everything 3 times. Then he'd had others check it. Then he'd checked it again. The engine started with a sound like thunder. Smooth, powerful, perfect. But Daniel didn't relax. Not until the plane was in the air. Not until Captain Rodriguez pushed it through every test, every maneuver, every stress point. "How's she handling?" Blackwood asked through the radio. He was on board, refusing to let anyone else take the risk. "Like a dream," Rodriguez replied, wonder in his voice. "Better than factory specifications. This boy didn't just fix your plane, Mr. Blackwood. He perfected it." From his monitoring station in the hangar, Daniel watched every reading, listened to every sound transmitted from the aircraft. And slowly, finally, he allowed himself to believe. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. When the plane landed safely an hour later, the hangar erupted in applause. But Daniel barely heard it. He was thinking about his father. Wishing Robert Harper could see this moment. Wishing he could know that everything he'd taught his son had mattered. Had saved lives. Had changed everything. The aftermath of that test flight changed more than just Daniel's life. It changed an entire industry. Within a week, the scandal had exploded across every news channel. Corporate sabotage. Criminal conspiracy. A network using private aviation for human trafficking, drug smuggling, and weapons transport. The investigation spread like wildfire, reaching into corners of power that had seemed untouchable. Edward Sterling got 25 years. Gregory Nash turned witness and got 15. But the arrests kept coming. 53 people in total. Maintenance contractors. Airport officials. Even a senator's chief of staff. But that's not the part of the story that matters most. What matters is what Jonathan Blackwood did next. "I want to start a program," he told Daniel one evening. They were in the hangar, watching the sun set through the massive doors. "A training initiative for kids like you. Kids who fell through the cracks but have talent nobody's bothering to see." Daniel looked at him. "Why?" "Because I almost died because I trusted credentials over capability. Because I built an empire but forgot what it cost. And because you reminded me that genius doesn't always come in the package we expect." They called it the Harper Initiative, named after Daniel's father. A full scholarship program for disadvantaged youth, teaching them aviation maintenance, engineering, and technical skills. The first class had 20 students, all from backgrounds like Daniel's. Homeless kids, foster kids, kids from families too poor to afford technical school, kids the world had decided weren't worth the investment. Daniel taught the first lesson himself, standing where his father might have stood, passing on knowledge that could have died with Robert Harper but instead was being given new life. An engine, he told them, doesn't care about your past. It doesn't care where you came from or who your parents were. It only cares if you treat it with respect and knowledge. Master those 2 things and you can make anything fly. One student, a 14-year-old named Tommy, raised his hand nervously. "But what if we make mistakes? What if we're not smart enough?" Daniel smiled. "My father used to say that the only real mistake is giving up. Everything else is just learning. I made mistakes working on Mr. Blackwood's plane. But I caught them, fixed them, and learned from them. That's what engineers do. We learn, we adapt, we improve." The program grew. Within 6 months, they had 50 students. Within a year, 200. Other companies started similar initiatives. The entire private aviation industry was forced to rethink how they trained and certified mechanics. The Johnson Protocol, named after Daniel's father's original name was Robert Johnson Harper, became standard practice. Triple verification. Independent checks. Multiple sets of eyes on every critical repair. Lives were being saved. Not just from sabotage but from the simple human errors that had caused accidents for decades. But Daniel's own journey was just beginning. He'd been accepted to MIT on a full scholarship. But he deferred for a year to get the training program established. The dean of engineering had come personally to see his work. "We could fast-track you," the dean offered. With your knowledge, you could graduate in 2 years. No, Daniel said firmly. I'll do it the right way. 4 years. Every class. Every lesson. My father didn't get to finish his education because life got in the way. I'm finishing mine for both of us. Jonathan Blackwood had changed too. His divorce was finalized, but his relationship with his son Parker had never been stronger. Parker had joined the training program, not as a student but as a volunteer, learning alongside kids from completely different worlds. You know what I realized? Parker told Daniel one day. I thought privilege was about what you inherit. Money, status, power. But real privilege is knowledge. The ability to do something valuable. You had that all along. I'm just now learning it. Victoria Blackwood, the ex-wife who'd mocked Daniel that first night, had moved to California. She sent one letter months later. Just 2 sentences. You were right. I was wrong. Daniel never responded. Some people needed to find their own way to understanding. Judge Washington became Daniel's legal guardian, but more importantly, she became his mentor in ways that had nothing to do with engines. She taught him about law, about justice, about how to fight corruption through proper channels. Your father's gift was understanding machines, she told him. But your gift is understanding systems. How they work. How they break. How to fix them. That's going to take you far beyond aircraft engines, Daniel. The anniversary of that first night brought everyone together. A ceremony in the same hangar where it all began. The aircraft that started everything, Blackwood's Gulfstream, sat gleaming in the center. They'd nicknamed it the Phoenix. 50 students graduated from the first phase of the program that day. 50 young people who'd been told they'd never amount to anything. Who'd been written off by society. Who'd been invisible. Now they were certified, employed, valued. They had futures. Daniel gave the graduation speech. He stood there, no longer the scared, hungry kid who'd stumbled in from the rain. Now he wore a simple suit that Judge Washington had bought him. His hands were clean. His face was healthy. But his eyes still held that same fierce determination. A year ago, he said, I was invisible. The world looked through me like I didn't exist. But I existed. I had value. I had knowledge. I just needed someone to see it. He looked at Jonathan Blackwood. One person seeing your worth can change everything. But here's the real truth I've learned. We can't wait for someone to see us. We have to see each other. Every person in this room has the power to be that one person who changes someone else's life. The applause was thunderous. But Daniel wasn't finished. My father taught me to fix engines. Mr. Blackwood taught me something else. How to fix systems that are breaking people. We're not just training mechanics here. We're training advocates. People who will speak up when something's wrong. Who will protect others the way Mr. Blackwood protected me. Who will remember that every person has value, even when the world forgets. 2 years later, Daniel Harper stood in a different hangar. This one at MIT's Aerospace Engineering facility. He was 19 now, halfway through his degree, but he'd never stopped teaching at the Harper Initiative. Every weekend, he returned to Chicago to work with new students. The program had expanded beyond anyone's dreams. 500 students across 10 cities. A 98% employment rate upon graduation. 0 safety incidents among their graduates. The Harper Initiative had become the gold standard for technical training. But the real measure of success wasn't in numbers. It was in stories. Like Jennifer, who'd been living in her car with her mother when she joined the program. Now she was lead inspector at a major airport, making enough to buy her mother a house. Like David, who'd aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. Now he was teaching younger students, passing on knowledge just like Daniel had. Like Sarah, who'd been told her entire life that girls didn't belong in mechanics. Now she was designing improvements to turbine systems that major manufacturers were adopting. Each story was a ripple, spreading outward. Each graduate went on to help others, creating a wave of change that kept growing. Daniel's own story had taken unexpected turns. After exposing the sabotage network, He'd been invited to testify before Congress. His testimony led to sweeping reforms in aviation safety oversight. He'd become, almost accidentally, an advocate for corporate accountability and worker protection. "You've become quite famous," Judge Washington told him during one of their regular dinners. "How does that feel?" "Uncomfortable," Daniel admitted. "I just fixed an engine. I didn't mean to start a movement." "But you did," she replied gently. "Because you had the courage to speak up when you saw something wrong. That's rare, Daniel. Especially when you had everything to lose." Jonathan Blackwood's company had thrived. With the criminal network dismantled, his business had expanded ethically and sustainably. But more importantly, he'd become a champion for reform across the entire industry. He'd given away millions to fund similar programs in other fields. The Harper Initiative model was being replicated in automotive repair, computer technology, healthcare, construction, anywhere that talent was being overlooked because it came in unexpected packages. "You cost me my marriage," Blackwood joked one day. "But you gave me back my soul. I'd say that's a fair trade." Parker Blackwood, once the entitled rich kid, had found his own path. He'd graduated from business school but chose to work directly with the training programs rather than join his father's executive team. "I used to think success meant corner offices and board meetings," Parker said during a program fundraiser. "Daniel taught me that real success is measured in lives changed, in opportunities created, in people lifted up rather than stepped over." The criminal network that had tried to kill Jonathan Blackwood had been thoroughly dismantled. But the investigation had revealed something important. It could only have existed because people at every level had looked the other way, had prioritized profit over safety, had valued convenience over conscience. That was the real disease. The sabotage was just a symptom. "We can't just fix the broken parts," Daniel told his students. "We have to fix the system that breaks them in the first place." That means speaking up, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it costs you something. Especially then. On the 3rd anniversary of that rainy night, they held a special ceremony. A memorial for Robert Harper and all the other skilled workers who'd been discarded by a system that valued credentials over capability, profit over people. Daniel stood before a bronze plaque being mounted in the main hangar. It read, "Robert Johnson Harper. Master Mechanic. Teacher. Father. He taught us that machines don't lie, and that every person deserves to be heard." "My father," Daniel said, his voice echoing in the packed hangar, "died believing he'd failed. Failed to provide for his family. Failed to leave a legacy. Failed to matter." He paused, emotion thick in his throat. "But he didn't fail. Everything he taught me became the foundation for all of this. His knowledge didn't die with him. It multiplied. It's living on in hundreds of students. Thousands more in the years to come. He mattered. He always mattered. We just didn't know how to see it." That night, Daniel returned to the small apartment above Judge Washington's garage, the space that had been his first real home in so long. He pulled out his father's leather notebook, worn now from constant use. On the last page, he wrote, "Dad, 3 years ago, I was alone, scared, and invisible. Today, I stood in front of 1,000 people and told them your story. Your legacy is alive and growing. The knowledge you gave me has become a movement. I hope wherever you are, you can see what we've built. I hope you know it all started with you. I hope you're proud." He closed the notebook gently. Outside, a plane flew overhead, its engine singing that familiar song. The sound of precision engineering. The sound of dreams given wings. The sound of everything his father had taught him to hear. Daniel walked to the window and looked up at the sky. Stars were coming out, bright and clear in the cold Chicago night. Tomorrow, he'd return to MIT. Next weekend, he'd teach another class. Next month, they'd open 3 more training centers. Next year, who knew? The ripples kept spreading. But tonight, in this quiet moment, Daniel Harper allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Purpose. Hope. He'd been invisible once. A homeless kid with nothing but knowledge nobody wanted. Now he was proof that worth isn't determined by circumstances. That talent exists in unexpected places. That one person, seeing another person's value, can change not just one life but hundreds. The system that had broken his father was being rebuilt, piece by piece. Not by politicians or executives or programs alone, but by people who'd learned what Daniel learned that rainy night. Everyone has value. Everyone deserves a chance. And sometimes, the person who looks like they have the least to offer has exactly what we need most. Outside, another plane lifted into the sky. Daniel smiled. Somewhere up there, his father was flying at last. And down here, his son was making sure that other kids just like he'd been, would get their chance to soar too. Because that's what his father would have wanted. That's what fixing things really means. Not just repairing what's broken, but building something better. Something that lifts everyone up. One engine at a time. One student at a time. One chance at a time. If you permit,